Okay, so our next presentation for the morning is Alice Wilson and Dwight Otwell. And Alice is from the city of New Bern, and they are working on resiliency as well. So I'm very excited to hear what they have to say, and I'll give the floor to you.
Thank you, Hope. So as she mentioned, I'm from the city of New Bern. I've been there since late 2000. So I was in Durham for 8 years, or since I was a teen, really. But I worked there for 8 years, and I went to New Bern for this quiet little town, and it's been anything but. So we're going to kind of talk about our resiliency, and Greg did a great presentation, and I appreciate all the hard work that others have been doing. So I figure out how to get this going. I don't know what I just did, but that was not the right one to do. All right, so first thought was in creating this presentation is thinking or identifying what is resiliency, what are we working towards. So I think there's kind of twofold. I did a Google search, what is the word resilience, and everybody does a Google search, right? And the two things that stood out to me was withstanding and bouncing back, kind of. And I like how thinking about in the city of New Bern, who has an elevation average of 9 feet, I like the buoyancy piece that was mentioned there at the bottom. Let's see. All right, so resiliency equals change. You can't keep expecting the same thing to occur. You want to look at change. So we just recognized last year the 100th anniversary of the Great Fire in New Bern, where a fourth of the city was burned down. So you don't think about fire retention nowadays. You have hydrants that are available that they didn't have back then. The building construction is different than it was back then. The fire department is different. How we manage fire is different. So resiliency requests that you make change. So thinking about New Bern, so like I said, I was looking for that nice, quiet little town, and we've been hit by a few storms. The worst one was 4 years ago when we were hit with Hurricane Florence. We thought, I was in Irene, I thought it can't get any worse than this, and I was wrong. Florence was pretty bad. We had a 10-foot surge. We had several hundreds and thousands of homes or structures that were damaged, infrastructure that was damaged, commercial buildings that were damaged, and it went on for a long time. So how do we make ourselves better from that? So where to start? Like I said, we had 221 commercial buildings that were damaged. We had, I think it was 1.2 million, just the initial assessment of damage from the city. And our poor bear sitting there with waders on, hoping not to flood. This is our park, and you can see the sign is underwater now. So GIS, how can we use GIS to be a part of that resiliency plan? We have great documentation before. So when we were applying for FEMA information or grants or trying to get money back to build back, we had great documentation when a road was last serviced or when infrastructure was placed, our utilities, when we were trying to get back online. We actually lost the entire city lost electricity. I've never seen that happen before. And we were able to bring it back very quickly because we had great GIS and documentation. Also, it's great for assessing, and the initial assessments and stuff like that, the conditions. And I'm not going to have time to open a drone, but the drone imagery, I never thought I was a drone fan, until I saw, what drone, because you can't access these areas. A lot of them are underwater, and having access to drone and looking at the drone imagery, you can actually see the structure. Okay, the water is at like one of our parks. We can see that the water is right at the top of the outfield fence. We know the height of that fence, and so we can use that as documentation of how high the water came. So no stagnant data. We shouldn't really, it's great to have historical data and hold on to it and use it, but we don't want to continue to have stagnant data. As Greg mentioned earlier, it's always good to have data and re-looking at stuff as technology is evolving and, you can access more data. So in 2004, we had FEMA data, and we were using that before Hurricane Florence. Should I have flood insurance or should I not? 2015, new data was being looked at, and we were reviewing it, but it didn't come out, and we didn't officially adopt it till 2020. So we had this app that we put out to kind of have citizens have, should I get in flood insurance or should I not? So they could slide back and forth. And you can see on the left-hand side, that was a 2004 data. And on the right was a new 2020 data. And you can see the area to the left probably is in the flood zone. And so we zoomed into that area. This is the Pembroke area. And yes, it was in the flood zone now, according to the 2020 data. And most of those, I think probably all of those houses did not have flood insurance when Florence came. So, again, you can look at all the houses and structures that were probably impacted from Hurricane Florence without, ability to maybe come back with FEMA help. So how can we help them and look at aspects of that? So again, having good data is really key. So we also looked at documentation using our GIS of repetitive losses. Some of those areas maybe we don't want to build back. So like I said, resiliency is change. So we looked at one area I highlighted here is called the Woodrow area. It got hit, probably one of the worst areas in New Bern that were hit. And if you look at the great data that we can get from the state that has the building footprints and with the elevation, we're right at, not quite 7 feet is the finished floor of these houses. You can imagine we had a 10-foot surge, what happened in this area. And the little dark dots are the houses that were completely destroyed, and the red dots that were severely damaged. And underneath that picture is all those little black dots. Those were houses that we actually ended up demolition. This is a kind of a middle class, lower class family type area. And so we're losing all those housing. How do we protect homes that, that middle class needs those houses, or, we want to make sure that affordable housing is available. And this area got pretty well decimated. So what normal looks like, another project we had. So this gentleman here is Stanley White. He was a prominent baseball player, I guess, back in the 40s. He came back he was born and raised in New Bern. He came back to New Bern after his baseball career. And he became the director of the Parks and Rec Department. And this area is called the Duffy Field area, and we'll talk about it a little bit. Excuse me, my allergies are about to get the best of me. He's very prominent. He worked with a lot of the youth to get them involved in sports and keep them out of trouble. And so they built a facility called the Stanley White Center. And he passed away, I think he was only in his 40s when he ended up passing away. So he was well remembered, and Hurricane Florence was kind of the final straw, if you will. This building sits right in that same area. You can see it's in the flood zone. It had been hit multiple times by hurricanes, and I think Florence put between 4 and 6 feet into the building. So the neighborhood says, we were talking about tearing it down because it just was, every time a storm would hit, it would be closed for a year or two while we repaired it, and Florence just decimated it. So the city said, we're just not, we're going to, FEMA was involved in the process. We don't want to build back here because it's going to it's every year, every time we have a storm, rather, it's getting damage to it. We don't really want you to build back. Well, the neighborhood just was totally upset about the process. And we could show using GIS that if we take it just a few feet, really 1,000 feet down the road, out of the flood zone, you can have a nice facility. And so we did that, and we were using GIS. We could do like a story map and just some zoom in and have public information sessions, and they could zoom in at where they live at. And not only can we have a new facility that's out of the flood zone, but it's a facility that can allow, if we do have another event, that they can go there and safely stay. So GIS is a really great tool for that. Sorry. So don't rinse and repeat. I think Dr. Procopi was mentioned earlier. There are a lot of schools that are out there doing great stuff, so take advantage of them. UNCW did a great analysis of structural areas using the building footprint stuff and vulnerable areas or social vulnerable areas, and combined the two to have like a social or vulnerability index of the whole eastern North Carolina. I'm so sorry. So look for the ports in the storm. Whether you have, if you have areas that have been damaged, like I said, don't build back. And I'm about to lose my voice here. I am so sorry. So you have the data, define your needs, define your priorities, the goals and stuff that you want to do. Try to find tools like Greg's tool or a cell adapt that we're going to talk about as well to utilize. So this was one of the projects that got flooded. We bought out all these properties from FEMA buyouts. They were weedy lots or whatever. One of them on the left-hand side was used for water retention. And so now using that and seeing the bigger picture, we can use it for, have a nice park and a nice feature versus just having, something that's a weedy vacant lot. So we can use it as Hope is my hero. Thank you. Having a weedy lot that no one wants to be a part of, you now have a way to have an amenity. So this is one of the grants that we've been working on, the stormwater retention and so it's kind of two pieces. It has a nice park aesthetic look to it, and I'm taking a swallow. But it also has a tool it built into it where it's a stormwater retention. It can help when we have storm events, that it can take that water and control that water rather than flooding. Maybe I'm going. There we go. All right, so we have a cell adapt, and Matt Hutchins is actually here. It's one of the tools that we used, and I don't know, Matt, did you want to talk about it, or you want me to talk? Gee, thanks, Matt. Thanks, Matt. So this was a wonderful tool that we have that we can look at vulnerability. So again, seeing the picture and seeing things that we don't normally see. And the nice thing about this is we can drill down to parcel level data to see a specific parcel, how vulnerable that specific parcel is. And we think it's wonderful, but the citizens love this. And I think Dwight is going to talk more about that, and thank goodness it's Dwight's turn to talk.
My blank screen, thank you. Hey, my name is Dwight Otwell. I work for Moffitt Nickel as one of our regional GIS managers, and we worked with New Bern on their hazard mitigation plan. And so I just really quickly like to focus on a very specific thread through this whole story and talk about how we start with a problem and end with a solution on the ground. And so this is just one very narrow piece of this whole story, but hopefully a bit illustrative of the kind of things that can be done and some of the things that are necessary to get this work. So you have a clear need. This is just going to be a general outline of the process. You have a plan once you've identified your need, stakeholder input, and I struggled with where to put this because this is a step that shows up everywhere and it loops back again and again. Public input every step of the way is really important. Then you have to identify what your projects are going to be, how you're going to get them done. Then you have to find out how you're going to pay for it. So now I'm going to map this a little bit more specifically to our current situation. If there wasn't a clear need before Florence, everybody was woken up and it's time to get something done. And so we worked with New Bern to develop the Hazard Mitigation and Resiliency Plan. And let me just say that I didn't get to do the fun and creative and hard work for this plan. That was done by folks like Alice, my colleague Dawn York, who's one of our environmental scientists. As a GIS lead for this project, I kind of stood in the middle, handed out data here and there, worked with Matt to get him the resources he need when he did a lot of the fun GIS stuff. But I was able to kind of observe and hopefully gain some insights. Fernleaf Excel Adapt tool. This is one of the big GIS tools. And I'm sorry, I also want to go back and point out points in this process where we're really leaning on GIS. And the resiliency plan is obviously very heavy in GIS, as Alice was pointing out. The Fernleaf tool is a GIS tool, and it's going to be feeding back into the public input and into the analysis again and again. We applied for some grants. Grants were used to take some of the ideas that were developed in the resiliency plan and flesh them out a little bit, develop like a solid prioritization and some conceptual designs. And we ended up with a Henderson Park project that we're currently in the middle of doing 50% designs, and New Bern is looking to push forward on that project and get that on the ground soon. So the hazard mitigation plan, let me get to my notes here. Let me read you a quote. I won't do this very much, I promise. By implementing the New Bern Resilience and Hazard Mitigation Plan, the city of New Bern, its residents, businesses, and community stakeholders will prepare for, adapt to, and respond to a future of rising tides and extreme storms, embrace equitable and sustainable development, increase economic security, protect public health, and protect its cultural heritage. The plan defines the problem, and it identifies the hazards and it quantifies the risks. Scratch that note, all right? It's a large effort. It requires a lot of stakeholder input. It requires a lot of GIS analysis. My role in this was to collect the data, like I said before, from the different sources, bring it from data, from Alice, from New Bern, get it to Matt, back and forth between our firm and the surveys we did on the ground and all the public information sessions that we had, bring this all into one source. And as you all know, GIS is a great place for the nexus of all this information to come together. And then we have grant writing. This is just a quick list of the stakeholders. I won't read this for you either, but just to point out that this is not even exhaustive. This is just the first page. There's a huge list of stakeholders that have to be included in any kind of large project like this, and they all have a different perspective and all have to be engaged with on their own terms. We start in with the Fernleaf Excel Adapt tool, and hopefully, if we have some time at the end of the presentation, we're running a little bit ahead, we might be able to demonstrate that for a little bit because it is really helpful. It's very illustrative, and what it does is it allows you to take some of the things that are normally in a larger report, buried in appendices, buried in tables and small maps, and allow the public, allow managers and analysts, scientists to really dig down and look at the piece of property they want to look at individual projects one at a time, tie it to the demographics and the vulnerability indexes of the communities. Make sure I'm not missing anything. And we use that to help write grants. This was a grant to take a look at the resiliency plan and do some conceptual designs. I think the hazard mitigation plan had something like 61 identified potential solutions as part of the final report. And what this grant allowed us to do was to dig into that, develop conceptual designs, have another round of public input, do some field visits to look at the actual sites on the ground. Here's our exciting public meeting. We had several of those in New Bern and a couple of them virtual because COVID kind of threw us for a loop in the middle of this. This was Alice selecting the project. She's telling us which one we're going to do. So I didn't get to, but my colleagues Dawn and Alice and a bunch of different stakeholders out in the field, looking at all the different potential solutions, using Excel Adapt to look at the communities and the vulnerabilities around them. There's a bunch of different problems, a bunch of different potential solutions. And eventually, what came to the top was the Henderson Park project. It's in a really low-lying area. The community is disadvantaged in many significant ways, and it just rose to the top as the clear priority for the amount of cost and return that you would have on your work. And so now that we have that done, the next step is the concepts and the initial design. So we're in the middle of doing a 50% design. I'm not a designer. We just recently got back the topo survey of the park here in the top left. And what we really want to do is look at all the different nature-based solutions. Let me see some of the words that I had to use here Dawn gave me. We'd like the green infrastructure. We're looking for riparian buffers, pocket wetlands, wetland bioswales, and just focus on nature-based solutions. Try to work with the water that's there in the landscape instead of fight against it. And the next step, this just came out last week. New Bern's put out a request for proposals for the final design and implementation and permitting for the Henderson Park Restoration Project. So what I'd like to point out at this point is that you have to start with the beginning in mind, because you know that you're going to be writing grants all the way through this process to support funding at every step. And you have to have the results of your previous steps feed into your grants for the next step. So the resiliency tool has been really helpful. The Excel Adapt tool is invaluable. And having folks that are in it from the beginning to the very end, understanding the whole process and where they want to go with this, and make sure that you have to have your ducks lined up in a row to get your funding for your later steps. And the last thing I'm going to point out is that I remember my first day of GIS school, and several times since then I've heard several different definitions of what GIS is. And it's some combination of software and hardware and systems, but it always includes the people. And I think the people are the most important part of this process. The people, the community input, the public, the municipalities we work with, the relationships we build, and understanding these systems is of the utmost importance. The tools are there, and they're very valuable, but without the people that are focused and willing to collaborate and cooperate, there's not going to be any progress. And that's the end of my presentation, my part of the presentation. I think Alice has a few more slides. I'll hand it back over. I'll step out of your way.
So I so apologize for my previous, I did want to go, I think I am going to go back up to the drone, because I think it's key to see what we're trying to fix. So that park that he just showed you, Henderson Park, this is where the Stanley White Center was at. We've torn it down. There we go. Okay, that's not what I expected. I was trying to do, that's definitely not what I'm expecting. Well, I won't show you the drone then. You can Google drones. There are a lot, if you Google New Bern and drone stuff, but drone, you know, like I said, I'm not a big, I was not a big drone. We actually, our CIO actually got certified to use our drone, and we actually have a company that's in New Bern that does a lot of drone work. They brought in UNC students one summer and did a lot of drone work. But if you imagine that you're underwater and you can't really do a whole lot of damage assessment. So we need a plan, right? And I wanted to talk about that piece of it. We've got all this great data from a variety of resources and great tools that we want it to do. And like I said, we can't continue right at the beginning. Do we want to just rebuild, or do we want to be able to withstand? And I think our goal is we want to be able to withstand. So some things, it's hard for a community, you know, to think about tearing down a Stanley White Center, which is a cultural icon. So New Bern was founded in 1710. So there's many cultural icons that we want to protect. And so kind of creating a plan of why we want to protect these people or these places, and what value do they have, trying to define those values. And I think GIS is a great tool to do that. So we started right after Hurricane Florence, we started creating a plan, and unfortunately COVID hit. So having public meetings was kind of hard. You know, I joked, I think with Dwight not too long ago, we were on a Zoom meeting, and I'm old, as you can tell, with the gray hair. I remember we used to say when we were a teenager, be there or be square, right? I think that we are there and we are square nowadays, because we're all on these little Zoom meetings. But having public input it's kind of hard sometimes, but we were able to get through it. So it didn't quite happen in the time frame we wanted, but we were still doing great stuff. So like I said, last year, we actually adopted our resiliency plan. And our resiliency plan has multiple parts to it. Dwight kind of hit on it. We've got what are called pillars. And we brought the community in and we got their input. And the key thing was housing and, or rather health and safety and then housing. Obviously, we want to keep our citizens safe. The economy, when businesses are damaged, how do they come back? The infrastructure, we got to have water and sewer, and because we are so flat, when those infrastructure get damaged, they can do a lot of environmental damage that we don't want to have happen, right? And like I said, our natural resources, our rivers and our streams, our wetlands, we want to protect those. And our cultural, like I said, we're an old city and we've got a lot of cultural, historical pieces that we want to protect. The Tryon Palace, the George Washington sites, or other forts that have a lot of meaning and cultural stuff. There's a QR code. You can actually go to our site and take a look at it. But out of those pillars, we also had different things like what are our priorities, what are our goals, and from those, we're actually creating actual steps that we can take to move forward. And so we got the plan. We're not waiting on, trying to stay and thinking that this is the ACC tournament's going on. I used a quote from Michael Jordan. Talent wins games, but teamwork and knowledge wins championships. Having that knowledge, having that GIS data and other knowledge that we were able to get and working together. And I highlighted some of the processes that we're not just doing alone, but we're inviting others. And I want to harp on that. We've got a lot of communities around us like Pollocksville and Trenton and other areas that don't have GIS staff. And we have to be willing to share our abilities and our data with them and make sure, because when they get damaged, that affects us as well. So our administration joined the American Flood Coalition. They just implemented what's called a Newbern Alert so that they can let citizens know when things are going on. Our electric department improved their vegetation management. They relocated a lot of infrastructure so that it won't get damaged. So going from having these telephone poles to putting things underground, which is not cheap. Our water resources did a bunch of stuff. They've got a lot of monitors and control and stuff like that in place. Our development services is doing a lot of good things. I won't read all of this. I just want to close with this and a drink of water. Don't be like Aladdin. So one of my coworkers, we were talking about all the grants that we got going on, all the projects that we got going on. He complains that Aladdin was given a choice of 3 wishes. He said, you should have asked for more wishes. So I found this thing where the genie says, it's a law, you can only have the 3 wishes no matter what. He said, okay, well, I want more genies. Don't be afraid to go out and get lots of grants or apply for them anyway. Always ask. You might get told no 100 times, but somewhere out there you're going to find. But before you do, kind of have a plan, have a project, have a definition of what you're looking for. And that's pretty much it. We're blessed to be in a state that provides a lot of great data, and we've got great resources, and take advantage of them. Like I said, the schools are doing great stuff. Take advantage of them. A town of 30-some thousand people couldn't have accomplished what we've done without great resources available to us. So thank you for putting up with my coughing and my voice, and thank you to Dwight and Matt Hutchins for all their great help and support for our city. So thank you. Thank you.